Aloha and welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Lynette Cruz. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today. This is a program that's sponsored by Kaleimaileali'i Hawaiian Civic Club with funding from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. We want to always recognize the Office of Hawaiian Affairs for being so generous and allowing us to do this series. My guest tonight is Keonu Sai. Many of you already know Dr. Sai. We have heard from him and about him from all kinds of different sources. I'll allow Dr. Sai to introduce himself, and then we'll just get right on into the discussion about righting the wrong, which is the title of today's program.
Well, being that this program is about new research, the research that I did when I got my PhD back in 2008 centered on the legal and political status of Hawaii since the 18th century to the present. And as I walked that narrative from the 18th century to the present, you naturally get into, once you've identified the problem, that Hawaii is occupied, that it's not a part of the United States, how do you fix the problem? So Chapter 5 was dedicated and titled Righting the Wrong, from occupied to restored country. Since then, you might say, since 2008, I've been actively carrying out, you might say, that blueprint of how to fix the problem. And I think that's what got me here today, to be on your show, and to other places throughout the world regarding Hawaii as a country, and how do we deal with this very complex issue, and how do we make it simple, but yet not compromise it. We're dealing with economics, we're dealing with legal, we're dealing with political, but we're also dealing with social, we're also dealing with psychological, because when people first hear this information, a lot of times what happens is they react and they don't want to hear it, because you're basically saying everything you thought you knew was a lie. It's like saying Uncle Sam is not your dad, is not your uncle, and you have proof. Then what naturally starts to happen, and I've seen this, is people go through what has been called the Stockholm Syndrome, where they try to justify why they were kidnapped, which is where that name came from. It dealt with a bank in Stockholm, the city of Stockholm, that robbers had taken, and people that were taken kidnapped, and it was a long kidnapping. And these individuals who were kidnapped began to believe in their kidnappers and justify what they were doing. Another term that is used more at home and people can relate to is battered wife syndrome. I used to be a social worker at the Queen Lili'uokalani Children's Center. And we dealt with women who were beaten by their husbands, and they would somehow try to justify why they were beaten,
Because they were bad people.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It wasn't good, but again, that's psychological. So you take that same idea and you take it at the macro level. You try to justify why America took us, because they say, well, somebody else would have taken us, and we're lucky they took us. That's all psychological. It has nothing to do with legal.
Right. I was actually going to go in two different directions. Right now, I'm wanting to call attention to the fact that we just had in Hawaii a series of meetings sponsored by the Department of Interior, 15 throughout the islands, and wanted you to comment a little bit about what was happening in those meetings, because the people who got up and spoke very strongly, forcefully, did not sound like they were wanting to be part of the battered wife syndrome anymore. Mm-hmm. So what do you make of that?
Well, I think what people were expressing throughout the 15 hearings across the islands, because I saw a lot of it, they were expressing genuine anger, not a learned anger. So when you wake up to this reality that you've been kidnapped, but yet you thought you were adopted, and then you find that there is overwhelming evidence that it is kidnapping, you're not going to be nice about it. You're not going to be respectful. You're going to vent, and I think that's a normal process. Some people have stated that I've heard it was very disrespectful for people to do what they did. I don't buy that. And when people say that, obviously they don't know Hawaii's history, But I think what the hearings provided was a venue where people could express themselves. And when I say people, I'm not limiting it to natives. You had people that were non-natives who are also affected by this information, because an occupied country doesn't only affect one particular population of that country, it's the entire country and all people who reside there. So
That's good. That sort of leads me into the second thing that I wanted to have you address. Before I left home today, there was an email. I read an email, I'm sorry, something on Facebook about a letter that was written by you to Esther Kia Aina, who was pretty much the person facilitating these hearings by the DOI. And I was kind of a little bit taken aback at your honesty in this letter, and I wanted you to speak a little bit about what that was, because by the time anybody watches this program, they will have read it already. It's kind of like it's out, it's in the public domain. What was that about?
Well, I really believe that as you learn your history and you learn the circumstances and you learn what Hawaii is going through and you actually experience it, like myself, what it does is it maximizes your responsibility. It makes you to do things at a higher caliber, okay? But I also believe that it also maximizes the ability and the responsibility for accountability. So if I see somebody saying something that is not true or is not correct, I'll call them on it.
Or is harmful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because these are issues that are real. What our ancestors have gone through, 121 years of lies, but what they've gone through in the latter part of the 19th century, they were hit hard for standing up for their country. They were ridiculed. They were portrayed in newspapers throughout the United States in cartoons as monkeys and savages. That's bad. That is bad. I don't like that, And what I don't like is for people today, especially our own people, to not even take that into consideration and give disparaging comments, especially in regard to the Department of Interior hearings. And that specifically was done by Esther Kia Aina. I was at this past Saturday, that was August 2nd, at the Marriott Hotel in Waikiki. The Prince Kuhio Hawaiian Civic Club put on a function, and it was a fundraiser for scholarships, and they were recognizing and honoring 4 people. Okay, Puakia Nogomeyer, Dr. Akina, DJ Mailer, and Esther Kia Aina. So I was there with my dad. My dad was a former president of Prince Kuhio. So my mom had purchased a table, and our family was there. And my family has been involved with Prince Kuhio Hawaiian Civic Club for a few decades. I mean, I remember growing up as a young child when they were practicing at McKinley High School,
That school, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it actually was, I don't know if it was McKinley, I think it was next to McKinley. It was Honolulu Community College before they moved. Yeah, they were adjacent to each other, so it was, it was a long time ago. Okay. But, so I grew up in the civic clubs. My Auntie Marlene, my Auntie Pee-wee, my Uncle Jiggy, my Nana, all my aunties. We're all Prince Kuhio because they sang, and my family were all musicians except for me and my cousins. So when I attended that function, I was interested. I was interested to hear what Esther would say. And instead of thanking for being recognized, it became a bully pulpit. They began to, it almost looked like it was a soapbox. And she began to basically ridicule the people that said no to federal recognition. And she made a comment that she says, Hawaii lost its sovereignty in 1893. And she said she was a self-declared pragmatist, that the route is federal recognition. And things were happening. You had a duo, Peter Apple and Brickwood Galaterio. They played music in honor of Esther, because each person who was honored had music played for them. And I found it very interesting that Peter Apple and Brickwood would make a comment the way they said. They said that they belong to a group called the Ohia Group, okay? And Brickwood followed up, yeah, you either Ohia or you Odea. And I went, wow, you think that's funny? You're talking to a Hawaiian community who's sitting in the audience, and you obviously are poking. And I found it interesting. You know, I wasn't angry. I just found it quite odd, but I was troubled by it. And here's the reason why I was troubled by it. I really didn't care what Peter Apo said. That's a non-issue. Even Brickwood, he's a politician. He can say whatever he wants. He's like Boehner in Congress. They can say whatever they want. Nobody holds them accountable because that's politics. The problem I had was Esther Kiaina was not a politician. Esther Kiaina was confirmed by the U.S. Senate as a political appointee in the executive branch of the Department of Interior, Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs. Now, I understand how governments work. I'm a political scientist. That's what we study. And individuals within the executive branch, in this particular case, Esther, as a political appointee, is supposed to assist the Secretary of the Interior to carry out policies agreed upon by the President of the United States. Because in the executive branch, everything is centralized. It was like when I was in the Army. You know, you don't step out of your commander's commitments and policies. You stay within it, you know. And that could be perceived as undermining the command structure. So you have to kind of follow through. So when I heard Esther say that the sovereignty of Hawaii was overthrown, see, I took that as an opportunity. I went, oh, you just open yourself up, because if that is a policy position, or a policy, but a position statement by the federal government, namely the federal government, the executive branch, then I'm going to call you on it. Because then what I need to have is, I need some evidential basis of that policy and that position statement, which I know you don't have, you know. So that's not a policy, that's an opinion. And that's not a position statement, that's an assumption. So I used it as an opportunity to draft this letter to speak to Esther as a government official, not as a politician, because I really don't care what she thinks. But she is an appointee, and I'm going to hold her to that. And she is appointed by a foreign government called the United States. That's not the Hawaiian Kingdom government. So under their rules, which I understand very well, I'm going to see if she can ensure that she backs up that position statement. Otherwise, she's going to be in trouble. So one thing that I recommended is that she makes a direct request to the Office of Legal Counsel, which is in the Department of Justice, to provide an exhaustive legal analysis in the form of an opinion for the Department of Interior, okay, to explain and show that the Hawaiian Kingdom, under international law, doesn't exist. Yeah? And that opinion is not just for Native Hawaiians. No, that opinion it's going to be for the whole world, because not only are the people of Hawaii affected by this information, but so are other countries and their nationals are affected, especially the countries that still have treaties with Hawaii. So when you speak to this issue of Hawaii being a country, I am not coming from a position that I'm trying to get Hawaii to become the Hawaiian Kingdom. No, no, no. I am operating as provided by my research, which has been critiqued, and it has gone through rigor, which is why I'm the expert in this particular area, that there is a presumption that the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. And a presumption is a conclusion based upon facts. This is not an assumption that the kingdom exists, because an assumption is a conclusion based upon no facts. You assume. So this presumption is it's a rule that in international law, as in domestic law, like the presumption of innocence, the presumption that the kingdom still exists is a rule of international law where Hawaiians do not need to prove the kingdom exists. That's not their burden, because the presumption is in their favor. It's like the presumption of innocence. The person who is accused of committing a crime does not have to prove their innocence. The burden is shifted onto the prosecution. They have to prove the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt with evidence. That's what we need here. So when I wrote that letter, it's really reiterating what Dr. Kamana Opono Crab requested from the Secretary of State. But that was politically derailed by the trustees of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and others, you know. So
What do you expect is going to happen with this most recent letter, the one to Esther?
it really doesn't matter what happens because the presumption is in our favor. If anything, it now reinforces the fact that the burden is on the United States to prove the kingdom doesn't exist and not upon me or the people of Hawaii or the world to prove it does exist.
So basically, it's the same thing. She can't answer, therefore she won't.
No, not that she can't answer. What I'm asking, I'm not asking her to answer because this is not her area. She is ignorant on Hawaii's history. Yeah, she doesn't know it. I'm asking her as a federal government official to do what you're supposed to do, to provide a direct request to the Office of Legal Counsel, Department of Justice, to answer that question. She can't. They can. You know? Now, I know they can because there's no treaty. And that's what you need to show if Hawaii is a part of the United States. There is no treaty. But if they somehow can find a treaty, then show it. And that would settle the issue. Now, if she does not provide that request to the Office of Legal Counsel, which she can, as part of the executive branch, you know, she can. She's authorized to ask that question. If she doesn't, then she will be admitting to Hawaii being occupied and that it isn't a part of the United States. So it's not she's in a position where she has a choice. And where I said maximize your responsibility or kuleana, this information also requires her to maximize her kuleana, her responsibility as the Assistant Secretary of Insular Affairs. You know, I'm just telling her to do her job and be the best at it. Because wouldn't you want the Department of Justice, Office of Legal Counsel to show that this is all frivolous so we can move on toward federal recognition, right?
You would think.
I know, I would think. I mean, as she says she's a pragmatist, I'm a pragmatist. In fact, I am so conservative in what I do, people call me radical. Yeah? I'm very conservative. I don't push the envelope. I just dig deeper in the envelope to show you what's in it. You know, so nobody's pushing the envelope here. What we're doing is do your job. And if you don't do your job, you're going to be held accountable. And if I don't hold you accountable, then I think your chain of command in the federal government is going to hold you accountable, because what she really did too there, when she publicly disparaged the people who were giving testimony in the 15 hearings, here's a consequence what she just did without her even knowing it. She just took out the 15 hearings, made them irrelevant now, because now somebody on the panel is prejudiced. They're supposed to be neutral. They're supposed to be receiving information. So by her making her statement, she damaged the credibility of the panel, because now nobody can trust what that panel is going to come up with, because you may not know if she may have manipulated the information submitted to him. If she was talking bad about Hawaiians who were giving testimony. She may not have liked what was said, but you don't come out and say those things. That's why you get paid the money to be a government official. You know, it's not like you only want to hear the people you want to hear from. It's a community thing. And it's not your fault they came out this way, but it is your responsibility to make sure that due process is happening. There was no due process here. This was a sham, and she showed it. So even more so, I think she should get that request in as soon as possible to the Department of Justice, Office of Legal Counsel, and settle this issue. Because then
yeah, those hearings
you don't have
are
to worry.
ongoing. I mean, so just because they're not here doesn't mean they're not having them.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that right across the U.S. where they're having them, the responses have been pretty much the same as here in Hawaii. So if people there understand that her position is not neutral at all, you're right, there may be some backlash at the future hearings that are they're coming up really soon.
Well, here's a way out for her, okay?
Good, because that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, here's a way out for her. Those comments would not be considered prejudicial if those comments made by the people at the 15 hearings were actually frivolous. Yeah. Now, she can't conclude it's frivolous because she doesn't have that background. So in order for her to preserve the integrity of these 15 hearings, she has to get the Office of Legal Counsel to show that these statements made by people giving testimony that the kingdom exists is frivolous. So in order for her to maintain what they did here, yeah, and maintain the record, she has to show that what was made as far as commentary and testimony was in fact frivolous. But she can't make a personal statement because then she's biased. She has to seek an opinion from an entity at the federal level that is more than authorized and capable of determining whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists or doesn't exist. So again, you can see how she's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. If she wants to maintain herself and what she did, and yeah, of course, and you know what? If they're able to prove that the kingdom does not exist beyond a reasonable doubt using international law, then I would say to her, my apologies. Your statements made against these people throughout Hawaii that were making points about Hawaii being a country was frivolous. You're right. I apologize. That hasn't happened because she hasn't gotten that opinion yet. So I provided her a copy of my doctoral dissertation. I provided her a copy of my law journal article out of San Francisco School of Law, a legal brief that was drafted by myself and Professor Matthew Craven from the University of London, all centering on Hawaii as an independent state. Let the Office of Legal Counsel dig into that and show otherwise. Show that the kingdom doesn't exist in order to protect the DOI hearings and federal recognition. So it's a prime example. People got to watch what they say. You know, and I've always said that when you're dealing with law, be careful. Law is like a sword. Be careful and be sure that you grab the sword by the handle and not by the blade. And right now, I'm witnessing people grabbing the law by the blade, and I'm seeing blood coming down, and they don't even feel it. I'm just bringing it to their attention. I think you're going to feel the pain pretty soon. Now, in order to alleviate that pain, get the opinion. Now you protect it. And you protected the position statement, if in fact that's what it was, of President Barack Obama's administration. So she has quite a burden on her since she became Assistant Secretary of Insular Affairs.
People have to be in the position they have to be in.
Yeah.
They have to. You brought a couple of books you wanted to share with others, I'm hoping. Yeah? So this one's your dissertation. Just in case you guys can see this. And in this dissertation, in chapter 5, you have some remarkable insights about how to fix the problem.
Right.
Because we kind of know what the problem is right now. So what do you say about fixing that problem?
Well, the problem is actually quite simple to fix, you know, when you really think about it. Legally speaking, the Hawaiian Kingdom exists, and we're occupied. Okay, so the person that was kidnapped is still the person that they were before the kidnapping. It's just that they don't know who that person was because they've been indoctrinated, they've been brainwashed. So this is not an issue of trying to restore the kingdom. The kingdom never left. The country is still here. We were just led to believe that it's gone. Yeah. So again, the presumption is in our favor. So I'm not focusing on trying to get the kingdom to come back. Yeah. What needs to be done is, how do you resolve the issue of occupation? Now, occupation is not the kingdom. Occupation is a situation of kidnapping. So the question then is, how do you end the occupation? Or how would you say you end a kidnapping situation? Now, before I get into chapter 5, because my committee members wanted me to really develop chapter 5, you know, the issue of how do you fix it. Now, when you move toward ending the occupation, there are legal frameworks that have already been established as doctrine for over a century. Okay, it's just how do you apply it? Yeah, and a lot of it is law-driven. effectiveness driven, and allegiance driven. Okay, so all these things come into play. But the one thing that I found, before you can even get into fixing the problem, you need to get people to see the problem. Yeah. So my committee members, before they could engage the last chapter of how do you fix the problem, I had to get them to the point where they cannot deny there's a problem. You know, and to understand that we have a problem is to understand our history, and that's why education is so important. You know, and when I say education, that's not an easy fix, because education takes time. Yeah, but I'm not saying things are not going to change until everybody gets educated. No, when you get educated, it's an individual thing. You know, it's not a cock-cold thing. You know, it's very individualistic. And when I say individualistic, people will need to see it through themselves, their family, their place, their space, and then what do I do? Yeah, but it always begins with themselves first. Yeah, because a lot of this is psychological, and you may start to engage those hurdles called battered wife syndrome, trying to justify, you know, and those are things that need to be worked out, you know. But those are psychological. It's not historical. It's not legal. It's not political. Now, once you get over that, then you naturally get into the, how does this information affect me? What about my home? What about my property? And I just found out that I don't own it, because there has been no lawful government here since 1893. It's just been run by insurgents who lied and said they're a government, and through the lies got our own people and myself to believe we're part of this government, when in fact it's all illegal. Yeah. So education takes many forms, you know, economic, political. One would be, I've seen a reaction. In fact, just this past weekend, my cousin, he's a retired lieutenant colonel, U.S. Marines. He was a helicopter pilot, Sea Stallions, Iraq War. And he had to grapple with that. So we're at a family reunion in Culiacán, and we're talking, and we're getting into it. And he was kind of fighting it, because how does he reconcile himself in the U.S. military, but yet he's a Hawaiian? Yeah. When we began to go over the terminology, when we began to go over the procedures, the history, and he's very regimented as far as how things operate, standing operating procedures, gathering information, processing. Yeah. He said, I got it. I said, hey, this is our country. And the way that you can reconcile your issue, which I don't see as an issue, but if you need to, you're a mercenary. And you're damn good at it. And you came home safe. And he laughed. He goes, that's right, I was a mercenary. And all of a sudden, the burden lifted, because that was something that he didn't have to carry. Because a lot of our people served in the military. How do you make sense of that? Yeah. But he still didn't lose sense of the fact that he's in a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. It's occupied. So these are steps that I've witnessed and I've experienced myself. And you need to reconcile a lot of things. So when somebody comes out and thinks they know what's going on, like they got it, take it with a grain of salt. It's not that easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy at all,
No.
actually. But I'm absolutely supportive of the idea of education, information flow. Looking at the second book here called Oamau Ke'ea, Sovereignty Endures. This is I guess it could be used as a book for teaching history in the public schools and in private schools anywhere. Yeah.
It's actually it's a classroom version of this doctoral dissertation. Yeah, it's a classroom version. This is very dense with law and political science terms, and what I try to do with the book is to make it user friendly. So it covers Hawaii's history from Kamehameha the first all the way till today, and it delves into the beginning of how do you right the wrong, but it's framed for classroom instruction. It has a glossary, it has terms, it has themes, things to think about, to generate discussion. And I've heard that many people have been using it, and I use it in my classes at the university at Windward Community College.
You know, our civic club, Kalemali'ali'i, introduced a resolution to support this, for the civic clubs to support this and to promote it with the Department of Education. And it was interesting, we didn't have any holdouts. You know, at these conventions every year, generally people fall into two categories. Yes, they support it, or no, they don't, and then they kind of have it out on the floor. There wasn't any, to my knowledge. No one spoke against it. That tells me something. Mm-hmm. They acknowledge the history that's in there. I don't know if everybody read it, but they live in another world where you're not going to use any of this stuff, but yes, it's true. Mm-hmm. And yes, they agree. What happened after that particular committee meeting, it passed out of committee. As I was exiting, a whole bunch of teachers approached me, high school mostly, and thanked us for putting that forward as a resolution because they had already been teaching it. And you know, in the public school system, not always a good idea to vary your teaching materials from what's required, you know, in the DOE. But they had been doing that, and they were so happy to have kind of like support, right? The civic clubs had already passed it. It still had to go to the floor, but they knew that they could defend their use of it because Hawaiians in the civic clubs supported it, just in case it ever came up.
Sure.
It was the first time that I understood how important it was for teachers who understood history to have some justification, some support for teaching this, mm-hmm. as opposed to all the other old, uninformed, incorrect stuff that they had been passed down to them.
And see, that's another example of maximizing responsibility, or kuleana. So as teachers, it is their responsibility to ensure that they have the most up-to-date information, and most importantly, information that has been vetted. Yeah, it's not a personal opinion. So I think by it stemming from my doctoral dissertation, gives the teachers some sense of relief that, okay, it has gone through that vetting process. This is not Keanu's view and only Keanu's view. You know, if when you understand, as you know, because you have a PhD as well, you are put through a ringer, you know, when you do your research, and your committee's job is to poke holes in it, which isn't bad. It's actually good, because that's called rigor. That's called defending your work and not trying to argue your work. So for teachers to have utilized the book, as you mentioned, I can only assume that they understand what it takes to get the PhD. And then when they read the book, it's even better because it's user-friendly. Yeah.
They had to have something to point at.
Yep.
I think they were trying to teach this information before, but they needed to say, look, this has already come out, it's been approved, this is what we've been teaching all along, but now we have justification for it. We have the document, and you know, that's the whole thing around research. I don't know if you knew or saw the last taping I did with Lorenz Gonscher on his research.
That was good.
In the Pacific. That was really interesting.
Lorenz is a very good researcher, you know.
Yeah.
He's good, and he's German. I love it because it shows it's just not a native issue. It's a global issue. Well,
there was some criticism. There were some questions that came his way and my way, copied to me, about his research, and whether, you know, is this really true, and how do you know, and blah, blah. But to his credit, because he speaks German and French and other languages, and he was able to do his research with the original documents, the primary sources, impeccable.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was like right on. You know, I was privileged to be part of that, or kind of listening in, you might say, on this discussion between him and another person who's also well known and has done research as well.
See, now for myself, the reason why I know Lawrence's work, because I'm actually on his doctoral committee. So I know Lawrence knows his stuff. But I'm not saying that he's perfect. Nobody is. But that's our job, to try to point out areas that need further development,
Right.
further clarification, you know. So well, I'm glad that person was able to be educated from Lawrence.
But I didn't hear back from him, so I don't know whether or not he took it well. I mean, you know, we all think that we are kind of like the experts in our field. We've been doing it for so long, whatever it is we're doing, and we know so much, and it's not always easy to get information that's new and contradictory, because it makes you feel like, well, how could I have missed that? Or, you know, and then it's like, maybe you have some doubt about all the other stuff you may have written about.
Well, does that person that you're referring to, without mentioning any names, does he have any type of research degree as a master's or PhD?
I don't know. I don't think so.
See, and that would probably be the reason.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't have the luxury of actually doing research and being critiqued in an academic setting, because he probably has a full-time job. You know, but Lawrence has that ability to do that. And I think we have to give credence to people that have done research, but we have to make sure that if we're going to be speaking to people on their research, keep it to what they researched and not get them to comment on things that they don't have any idea about.
No
You know.
editorializing. Yeah, just stick to the point and
Yeah.
show me the documents,
Yeah.
show me the proof. So I wanted to move then back to your dissertation, because we do,
How do you right the wrong?
righting the wrong, and that's a topic of today's show. And you got 20 minutes. Tell us how to fix it, if it fits.
Sure. Okay, so here's the context that people need to understand. In the past, people thought with the Hawaiian sovereignty movement, which is really a non-issue because it's irrelevant now. We're not moving towards sovereignty. Sovereignty is in a country that has already been established, internationally recognized since 1843. Okay, so it renders the sovereignty movement moot. Okay, so if sovereignty is in the country, then what about the government? Because the government is not the sovereignty. The government is the physical body that exercises that authority. Now, throughout the world, all sovereign states are the same. Yeah, they're all the same. Yeah, they vary in size, but they're all the same and equal under the law, international law. But not all governments are the same. All governments are geopolitical. They are reflective of their time, space, and place, yeah, and history. So the Chinese government, in exercising Chinese sovereignty, is different from the American government exercising American sovereignty, or the Canadian government exercising Canadian sovereignty. So the Hawaiian government that was exercising Hawaiian sovereignty was called the Hawaiian Kingdom. Okay, that's the country, the government called the Hawaiian Kingdom. Queen Liliuokalani in 1893 was the chief executive. She was not an absolute monarch. By 1864, the Hawaiian Kingdom had already adopted the separation of powers doctrine. And the separation of powers doctrine is basically the cornerstone of constitutional law. Every government tries to achieve, in a constitutional sense, separation of powers, because checks and balances, okay? So Hawaii already had that. So Queen Liliuokalani was the chief executive of this government that looked very much like the government we have today, okay? So today's police department goes back to the 1800s. Today's fire department goes back to the 1800s. Today's Bureau of Conveyances goes back to the 1800s. The courts, the Attorney General, everything goes back to the 1800s. So the Hawaiian Kingdom, its infrastructure was there. And when you think about it, how could 30 people, 30 insurgents in one day, January 17th, take over an entire country? It's kind of mind-boggling, yeah? Especially when you have different governors on each island, which we now call mayors. You know, it actually came from the kingdom era. The way they did it was they fabricated a revolution, okay, which was a lie, and that was determined by James Blount and President Cleveland, who was the president at that time of the investigation. The former U.S. ambassador, John Stevens, fabricated as if the U.S. Marines were landed to protect American lives, when in reality they were landed to protect the insurgents from being arrested. Once they seized control of the executive head, the chief executive head, the Queen and her cabinet, and replaced it with the Committee of Safety. Okay. Then, with threat of harm from the U.S. military, forced everybody to sign oaths of allegiance to the insurgency. Yeah? Or you lose your job, or something else may happen. A case in point regarding that particular issue is the Royal Hawaiian Band. In February of 1893, they were relieved. They were fired because they refused to sign the Oath of Allegiance. And Mrs. Prendergast composed a song of their defiance, which song today is known as Kaulananapua, which is also called, by its original name, Mele Aloha Aina. Aloha Aina is patriot. It was called the Patriot Song. And in 1894, in February, the Royal Hawaiian Band danced to it with what is called the hula ku'i. Yeah, it's like the haka, very defiant type of hula. And Kaulananapua was not sung the way we sing it today. Yeah. But what I appreciate is that Kaulananapua, which is Mele Aloha Aina, the lyrics are still the same. Do not sign the paper of the enemy with its sin of annexation and loss of civil rights. And that's all in Hawaiian, you know, si vila a o ke kanaka. But nobody knows that today. Not nobody. A lot of people don't know that. I mean, they play that song in Safeway. You know, nobody gets it. But I find it interesting that it has lasted that long. It has endured 121 years. Or should I say 120 years, because 1994 it was composed. So here you have an entire governmental structure taking over through the unlawful exercise of the US military in a foreign country. And then when that military was forced to leave by James Blount back in 1893 on April 1st, these insurgents, with their money, began to recruit mercenaries coming out of San Francisco who were retired military of the United States to replace the US military that left. So all you have is a military controlled entity disguising itself as a government. So really the Hawaiian Kingdom government, the name changed from Hawaiian Kingdom government to the provisional government. Then in 1894 it changed to the Republic of Hawaii government. Then it changed to the territorial government in 1900, and then it changed to the state of Hawaii government in 1959. That governmental infrastructure was not created by the United States. That's ours. It just got carjacked. So what you had in 1893 was a decapitation of the head from the body. That's our body. And the head was the queen and her cabinet. After she passed, and the last heir under Hawaiian law passed, which was Prince Kuhio, there was no head that people could see. All you had was his body that is illegal. You know, it's still an insurgency disguised as if it's a lawful government. The problem is this state of Hawaii government relies on its authority from the United States. The problem we're running into now is the cat's out of the bag. The United States Congress has no connection to this body that they supposedly created in 1959 through the Hawaii Statehood Act, because Congress has no force beyond the borders of the United States. We have no treaty. So what we have is the state of Hawaii as a governing body, the police department, the fire department, the Department of Education, everything. It's illegal. It's just as illegal now as it was in 1893. The difference is we have our own people in it who have been led to believe it's a lawful government. You know? So what we needed to do was to explain to people what happens in that situation. That is what we call occupation, because that entity, this unlawful government, is being maintained by the unlawful presence of the United States. In reality, that unlawful government is supposed to have a provisional head on it, and that's supposed to be a military governor, where the US military, under the laws of occupation, the Hague and Geneva Conventions, are supposed to reestablish a provisional head to maintain the function of government. But the authority of that government is not Hawaiian sovereignty. The authority of that government is a military government regulated by international law and exercising Hawaiian sovereignty. So they're supposed to administer the laws of the occupied state. Now, obviously, that didn't happen since 1893. That's what's supposed to have happened. So the end game would be getting the military commander to establish a military government by appointing a military governor to put on a head onto that illegal body to become what is called a military government and to administer Hawaiian law as it was in 1893. Now, my recommendation in my dissertation is, but how do you administer Hawaiian law in 1893 when everybody here today is operating on laws that may have not been there in 1893? So from 1893 to the present, these are all illegal laws, but yet we're under it. We're operating. So my proposal in my proposed plan was, number one, to have the military governor through the Pacific Command, it's the highest ranking military officer here in Hawaii, in compliance with the law of occupation, okay, to issue a proclamation establishing a military government, thereby giving this illegal entity a sense of legality under the laws of occupation, and to administer the laws of the occupied country. But then also he needs to follow up with a second proclamation declaring that all laws illegally imposed in Hawaii since 1893 to the present will be the temporary laws of the occupied state, so long as these laws do not run contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law and the law of occupation. That's the only way, through necessity, that I could figure out and propose a plan. Okay. Now, to get that going, we needed to address the fact that the head, called the chief executive, was still there in law, but physically not there. So we had to take steps back in 1997. This is before my dissertation. We had to take steps to reestablish that chief executive of Hawaiian law, called the Queen and her cabinet, under what is called the doctrine of necessity, to basically resurrect it. And that is what we called an acting government. So an acting government is not a real government. It is a government established through extraordinary circumstances. No different than when I was in the Army, a private becomes a lieutenant in time of war. That doesn't make him a lieutenant, but he's the acting lieutenant. But he may still carry the private rank, but he's going to be treated as a lieutenant. When a properly commissioned officer comes, he goes back down being a private. We applied that same logic. And it was from 1997 when we reactivated that executive head, we were then able to begin to expose Hawaii as an occupied country, both locally in Hawaii, nationally, as well as abroad. We've managed to enter the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. We've been able to access venues at the international level that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access. They looked into our status. They couldn't deny it. But we're not one to gloat. We're not one to say, hey, we're the government. No. We're just doing what we're supposed to do to get this moving. The ultimate goal, when we end the occupation, is to reattach that decapitated head, onto that Hawaiian body. And then from there, make it legal. So that's when our people are going to participate with voting, exercising their rights. And then the occupation comes to an end, and now this entity called the Hawaiian government can now move on its own. We're not there yet. It all begins with education, but the plan is there. The plan is definitely there, and it's operating with doctrine. It's not operating in a vacuum. This is not ad-libbing. This is deliberate. It's methodical. It's procedural, and I think that's what's so scary. It's actually doable. One thing that will always affect what you can do procedurally is people's knowledge that it can be done procedurally. So people need to understand that there is a process, and that they need to know not only the process, but they need to know their rights, because they need to hold people accountable. So people in the acting government, if they do a violation of a right or a law or some vested right of a person, that person still has the ability to have redress and hold individuals accountable, including myself. So it's a crawl, walk, run. Yeah. Some people are running, some are crawling, some people just woke up, and some are walking. So everybody's at a different stage. But when you see this through the framework of Hawaii as a country, it's already laid out. So it is important to know that what we do in the future is from an understanding of our past. Because our past will tell us how we fix it. And that's Hawaiian law, international law, and so forth.
Everybody got that, right?
We can play it over and over.
Yes,
Rewind.
play it over and over. This is available for people to look at or to read, right?
What people can do is go on Google my name, Dr. Keanu Sai. It'll take you to a UH website. I would say what the URL is, but it gets complicated. It's like www.hawaii.edu/anu. Easy.
Okay.
Google Dr. Keanu Sai. It'll take you to the University of Hawaii website. Go to my publications link. They can download that dissertation, as well as other publications that I've done, law articles and so forth.
Excellent.
And as far as this book right here, people can actually purchase it online. They can go to.
Does it come with a video? 'Cause I
You can
saw a
purchase it.
video,
You can
with
purchase
that,
it
yeah.
from the publisher. It's not from me. This is from Pu'a Foundation. So they can go to Pu'a Foundation, PUA Foundation.org, and go to products, and they can order it online, and it gets mailed to them. My students purchase it for classes.
So this is
online.
a required text for
Yep,
them.
required text.
Yeah, so for those people who are looking at teaching this information, you don't have to be in Hawaii either.
Absolutely.
Right, so it's available. What do you want to end with? We have 5 minutes.
Well,
We hardly ever get a chance to sit down anyway and talk stories, so kind of talking story in front of an audience right now.
I'm quite happy of how things are moving.
I'm happy you're happy.
Yeah. I mean, nobody has ever seen me angry, but I can get pushed to a certain point.
I have seen you frustrated. Okay.
But then the frustration is an indication, go figure it out. I don't believe in frustration. It's just an indication that you may not know everything at a particular point. But I'm happy to see our people waking up. I'm happy to see our people asking the right questions. I'm happy to see people are actually feeling the pain that our kupuna went through and not being taught about that pain. They're feeling it. I'm happy that things are happening the way they are because it gets people to move further. I don't believe in everybody getting together to be something. No, if you bring 100 people together that are confused, you have what is called compounded confusion. I believe you bring people together when there is a focus and a direction on what you need to accomplish. So when we talk about the Ku'e petition of 21,000 signatures by the Hawaiian Patriotic League, it wasn't to unify the people. No, it was getting people to put their names down in order to get the Senate to not pass the treaty. That's what it did, and they succeeded. So what it does show is that our people can come together, and it doesn't only include natives, because people who signed that petition were non-natives as well as non-Hawaiian nationals. But it shows that you can come together when you have a reason to come together to address a particular issue.
In this instance, unification was an effect, a byproduct, because today, today, it serves a different purpose, as a matter of fact. And I'm just thinking about how we define educational outreach and educational programs, because for people at those DOI hearings to say what they said, they learned something from somebody.
Absolutely.
So like right across the board. So if you say 95% of the people who testified no,
Right.
and giving reasons for that, they learned that from somebody.
Well, I think
from someplace.
it has a lot to do with technology nowadays, social media.
Right.
In Egypt, they called it the Arab Spring. And I think what we're having here is not a physical revolution. I think we're having a cerebral revolution. It's all in your head. It's an educational campaign. That's what's happening. And I think that's the wave, that's the nalu that has been generated. And it's crashing now on the shores. This nalu of education, people shouldn't fight it. They're not going to win. People should ride it. Everybody should take up the surfboard, start riding the wave of education. You got formal, you got informal, you got conversation, you have people talking amongst family and, over dinner. You know, that's the Nalu, that's the wave, you know. And I think that's what I'm most happy about, is that I call it the sleeping giant has awoken, and that's the wave, you know. But we need to be careful, because the wave can hurt people, especially when you stand in front of it and you don't understand how to ride the wave. So again, education will get people to try to ride it. So my letter to Esther Kia'aina as the Assistant Secretary is I'm basically trying to get her to ride the wave. Be the best Assistant Secretary of Insular Affairs for the United States of America by getting answers to that question in order to ensure that your 15 days of hearings here was all good and that you were not providing any prejudice, because it was frivolous. But at this point, you can't say it's frivolous, and therefore it is prejudice until you get that opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel. But it's your job to do that. Know how to ride the wave at the federal level. You know, she's still a Hawaiian.
She should learn how to surf.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Instead of going over the falls.
Well,
I used to live at Sandy Beach.
don't
I know
take us with
exactly how
you,
that
yes.
goes.
So anyway, just wanted to thank you for being here and sharing all of that. It's always good. I'm sure people would love to hear more from you constantly. I mean, there's just more that we need to know. We think we know stuff, but we don't really. Thank you for joining us. Thank you guys who are watching for joining us. I'm Lynette Cruz, my guest Keanu Sai. You've been watching Issues That Matter. Thank you to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and to Kalemali'ili'i Hawaiian Civic Club, which sponsors this series. And by the way, this is the last one. You're number 8. That is being funded by the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, but that doesn't mean we're not going to continue to do this. We'll find some way to do it, because there's way more information out there that people don't know about, I don't know about, and we can all learn. Aloha, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Keanu.
Thank you. Mahalo.